Hello, and welcome to the 8th in this series of short films on foundational concepts in economics. What we're looking at now is the idea which I think many contemporary economists would regard as being one of the most fundamental, and that is the idea of the price system and what the price system does, what prices are, and what part they play in human economic life. Now, the insight to grasp is that for all economists, prices are the key mechanism through which a spontaneous economic order arises. This is true right across the board. If you do any level of economics, one of the first things you will learn or be taught is about the price system and the way in which it leads to the optimal allocation of resources. To the extent that economic life is orderly, it's because you have a functioning price system, is what every economist will tell you. Now, Oscar Wilde, the 19th century social figure and playwright, famously remarked that economists are people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Now, if you are an economist, one of the things you will realize is that Oscar's statement, while witty, is nonsense. The only way that you can tell how valuable something is to most people, to people on average, in other words, is the price that it will fetch in an open market, an auction, or some medium of exchange. Now, that doesn't tell you about anything about the absolute value of it, but economists are not concerned with absolute value. Economists are only concerned with the exchange values of goods, which reflect, as we explained in one of the earlier films in the series, people's subjective preferences. Now, you may disagree with your fellow human beings' subjective evaluation of a particular thing, but that's just your personal opinion. So why is this, though? Why is it that prices are the only way we can actually work out in the world we live in what people collectively think is the relative value of different things? Well, prices can only arise when there's an exchange. If you think about Robinson Crusoe, there was no way he could put a price on any of the goods he had on his desert island. Once Man Friday arrived there, there could have been a price, once the two of them started to exchange goods between each other. Now, we tend to think of exchange prices in terms of money. We will say that the price of a certain good is so many pounds, so many euros or dollars. But actually, that's not correct, strictly speaking. In this context, money is more like a language or symbolic system that we use to express prices. If we say that one barrel of beer has the same money price as 2 bushels of wheat, what we're saying is actually that 2 bushels of wheat exchange for 1 barrel of beer. The money is just the language that we use to describe the rate at which different commodities and services can be exchanged for each other. And so it's a way of expressing prices, but that's all that it is. Money has no real existence in this context as a thing in itself. It's simply the language of prices. And so prices then are a measure of the rate at which one good exchanges for another. Now, the point, bearing in mind the principal opportunity cost, is that when you make an exchange, you give up one good in order to get another. If you actually hand over money, what you're doing is you're giving up the other things that you could have got in exchange for that money in order to get the thing that you do give it for. And what you do, if you're rational, is to exchange one good for another which has a higher marginal value to you at the time that you make that exchange. Now, with money, what that means is that you start to get a series of money prices. And these then do 2 things according to different kinds of economists. The first is that they enable resources to be allocated efficiently. What prices do in the neoclassical way of thinking about spontaneous order is that they basically mean that, provided the prices arise in a process that has certain features, that all the resources will, by an automatic process, be allocated to their most productive use. Now, what this means is that the worst thing you can do in any economy is to control prices. There are all kinds of things you can do that will have bad effects in a complex economy, but controlling prices is definitely top of the list. It is the worst thing you can do, and this is something that every economist, regardless of their political persuasions or ideology, will tell you. There are many, many examples in the contemporary world and from history of just how catastrophic controlling prices can be. The best example, perhaps, in the contemporary world is Venezuela, where the economy has effectively completely collapsed. And pretty much every economist will tell you that the main reason why this has happened is because of the attempts of the Venezuelan government to control prices. This has completely messed up the allocation of resources within the Venezuelan economy. So if you take the view that prices are the means by which resources are allocated to the use which will maximize collective welfare, then you really, really must not interfere with them. Now, the other way of thinking about prices is the way that the Austrian school, following Friedrich Hayek, thinks about them. This also makes them hugely important, but in a slightly different way to the neoclassical model. In Hayek's thinking, what prices do is to transmit information. They give signals to people. Remember, for Hayek, the central feature of the human world is our radical ignorance because of the knowledge problem. What prices do for Hayek is to enable us to get an idea about what is going on in the world without having to go to the trouble and effort of getting access to knowledge, which in many cases is not accessible anyway. The famous example he gives is of a storm in Malaysia which destroys tin dredgers. The result is that there's less tin in the world, and what will happen is that the price of tin on the metal exchanges will go up. Now, what this does is to tell tin producers with marginal resources that maybe it's now worth their while opening up that tin mine in Cornwall, for example. It also tells tin consumers that maybe they should buy less tin, consume less tin, or look for a substitute tin that is going to do the same job but at lower cost. Now, the point is that what this will do is to adjust economic activity to the new reality of the world in which most of Malaysia's tin production has stopped. But the people who make the adjustments, the consumers and producers, do not need to actually know anything about what is going on in Malaysia or the climate of Southeast Asia. All they need to know is what the prices are saying. And therefore, the prices are giving them information which leads them to act in a way that will ultimately do what the neoclassical model also explains is going on, allocate resources in the most efficient way. The difference is that for Hayek, there's a lag, there's a process which takes place of adjustment, and this can take time. But the end effect is the same as it is in the neoclassical model. Now, what this means again, for Hayek just as much as for the neoclassical economists, is that really you should not interfere with prices. Because if you do, what you are doing is destroying the information system that enables us to cope with the problem of dispersed and tacit knowledge. In either way, prices produced by exchange are absolutely vital in terms of having a spontaneous economic order that actually works. Now, this does lead to a number of other conclusions, which I'll just lightly touch upon. One is that there can be a problem if certain goods are not actually exchanged or traded, and so don't find expression in prices. That way, it becomes much more difficult to decide how to allocate them. This is a problem because a very large part of human life consists of activities that are economically productive but are not traded. And so as a result, they don't generate prices of any kind. And so that area of life, what we might call the domestic area of life, is not subject to economic rules. Another thing which is worth mentioning is that it's prices which enable markets to act as discovery devices. If you're trying out something new, prices will send signals as to how successful your new experiment has been or not. And this is what Hayek in particular tends to emphasize in his famous essay, The Market as a Discovery Procedure. It also shows the way in which, in many cases, the process of economic discovery involves profit. And profit should be understood in this context, just like price, as being a kind of information transmitting mechanism that guides profit-seeking entrepreneurs and others. Finally, this is why Oscar Wilde is wrong. What prices do is tell you at any given time what all your fellow human beings think the value of one thing is relative to the value of another. So the price of everything for an economist is also the value of everything in the world in which we live.